How do you see the future of auto trade and HVAC companies in Oklahoma over the next 5 years, like growing?
Mm, okay, in Oklahoma. I don't know the market quite as well because that is actually a market that we haven't entered, and we haven't entered it specifically because we view that as uh, kind of a next step for our private equity purposes and our strategic uh, plan to grow. So. Um, But how do I see it? How do I see the overall market going? Um, there's still roughly like 25,000 independent collision repair places. I mean, don't quote me on that. I don't know the exact. It's very, very high. But the percentages of still the consolidation, there's a meaning there's a lot of small independent shops that are still that we could go buy, and that's going to continue to drive excitement from private equity, which will continue to drive competition and higher purchase prices. The other thing within our industry specific, I don't know about HVAC, but our industry specific is very complicated. So the cost of repairing a vehicle is going up every single year. And so they look at it as opportunity to grow revenue, grow same store sales, and also add margin because of the complexity of the repair. And so the last piece, I guess it does also add is there's a barrier to entry to get into our market that makes it difficult for, let's say, somebody like me who is just starting out. It costs so much money for equipment and training. It's not an easy industry to get into. So they look at it as the barrier to entry high. It's going to continue to get more and more expensive. It's more and more complicated, meaning less people will want to get into the industry. There's more need for capital. And the reason that capital would be important is because the equipment to fix this has gotten more and more, and then the training, training new people has gotten pretty difficult. So,
Yeah, for sure.
I mean,
Uh,
I could talk to you for a long time about it. We'll try to keep these even shorter so you don't have
oh, you're
to
you're
be on
totally
ground.
fine. Talk as much as you need to. I am much appreciative of your information that you're giving me. So,
Yeah.
I have one more question actually. So, how do you think COVID impacted your industry? I feel like that's still like a current thing, and I was actually just talking
Yeah.
to Professor Jones about that today.
Yeah. COVID was a really interesting it was an interesting time to go through for every business owner, okay? But specifically with the collision repair, most people didn't really understand how it would affect us, but people stopped commuting to work. They stopped driving their cars quite a bit. And you even saw this in the gas prices. When all of a sudden nobody needed gas, do you remember gas got so cheap?
Yes.
They were trying to almost give it away. As a matter of fact, I think it actually went negative on the market for a little bit of time where they were paying people to take the gas supply that they couldn't offload. Very interesting.
Very.
Well, a lot of our industry is driven by the amount of miles people drive in their cars. So if people aren't driving their car, then they are not wrecking their car and
Right.
they're not crashing into little things here and there. So that had a pretty big impact. The other thing that really impacted our industry with the COVID is the supply chain started to be very scarce. And so we all of a sudden had these um, difficult time getting normal parts that we would never have a problem getting. They became because these factories shut down and shipping lanes shut down and all this stuff happened. These parts became very scarce. Well, that didn't just happen to our industry. It also happened to the people that are building these cars, the Hondas and the Toyotas and everything like that. And so what happened is, if you remember, cars became very expensive at that time. And they also became really scarce. Like people were paying all this extra money to go buy a car that they could have bought 10 years ago, or not 10 years ago, 3 years, 2 years before COVID, that was maybe even 15, 20% less money. And so that really impacted our industry. And I'll tell you the reason why. When people get in an accident, their vehicle is only worth so much money. And what happened is all of a sudden their vehicle became worth 25% more. So if we would typically, let's say we fix a car that is a has a the car has a value of $10,000, and let's say that our estimate to fix the car was $7,000. Okay, the insurance company normally would total that car. They would just say, "Hey, it's too much to repair it. It's 70% of the value. We're going to get rid of it." Then what happened is that car, instead of being worth $10,000, was suddenly worth $14,000. So now a car that would come into our facility, we would evaluate and it would go to the junkyard. They were actually now saying, start fixing this. So our industry actually got a whole bunch of extra, um, this big tailwind of demand. So we were all of a sudden post COVID, we slowed down very slow. Nobody was driving. 1 year after COVID, everybody was backed up 3 or 4 months. They couldn't even get your car in.
Yeah.
And you may even remember this, and that was a lot of people in a whole bunch of different industries. So
Yeah.
a long explanation, but hopefully that answers a little bit of
No.
your question.
Yeah, that's perfect. It's funny you say that because, like, I was turning 16 when COVID hit the United States.
Hmm.
And my parents trying to find me a car was probably one of the hardest things that they could have done during that time because nothing was like market price. It was all really like jacked up. Like,
Yep.
you even find like 2015 for something less than like $30,000, I feel like, So it was
Yes.
crazy.
Yeah, you pick it up exactly what was happening, and now we're seeing those cars come down, and there's been a lot of inflation in our industry. People are nervous about it. They're not as flush with money, um, because the government gave out a whole bunch of money to people, and then they decided, well, it's burning a hole, let's go spend it. So it worked the way the government wanted it to, but all of a sudden the supply chain was so damaged that it made it a lot of scarcity in the market. So people were willing to pay these enormous prices. So, anyways.